Welcome, everyone, to the 2026 Cahokia Mounds Virtual Winter Lecture Series. I'm Dr. Angela Cooper, the Site Services Specialist 2 for Cahokia Mounds State Historic Site. Before I introduce today's speaker, I want to promote a few events that we're having. So we will have our sunrise observation on Sunday, March 22nd at 6:45 a.m. at Woodhenge. Bill Eisminger, he's a retired site archaeologist. He should be out there again as well. If not, I'll be giving the presentation on how Woodhenge was discovered at the site and what we think it might have been used for. The same day, our final lecture of the winter lecture series will be Dr. Erin Benson, and she will be presenting on collaborative archaeology and community history in Brooklyn, Illinois, and that will be at 1 p.m. on Sunday, March 22nd. And then our next event will be the Native American Art Market that the Cahokia Mounds Museum Society always hosts. And this year it will be back in the Interpretive Center. And that is from April 24th to the 26th. So Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Okay, so we are continuing our lecture series with Dr. Eric Singleton, the McCasland Chair of Cowboy Culture and Curator of Native American Art and Ethnology at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City. His research focuses on Great Plains and Southeastern 2D and 3D artwork, as well as pre-Columbian and historical symbology, ritual, and belief. Dr. Singleton has co-authored 4 books, won 2 Oklahoma Book of the Year awards, completed 24 exhibitions, and worked on 4 documentaries. His presentation is entitled Reinterpretations of Ancient Spiro, the Ritual Realm of the Mississippians. So you can go ahead and start.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you guys having me. I'm also going to say thank you for your patience. This is, all I'm doing is kind of staring at myself right now. And so as I go through this, I think that if it comes across, with a little bit of a pause, that's what's going on. But anyway, I just want to say thank you so much for having me here. Spiro is something I'm extremely passionate about, and it's something that I have been working on as both an exhibition, I did a publication, and just as personal research and academic research for about the last 15 years. This is particularly important to me because I was the curator of anthropology at the Gilcrease Museum I worked there for almost 10 years, curator of anthropology for about 7 or 8. And in that time, I curated a wide assortment of archaeological and historical objects. And a large part of our collection was Mississippian. And the truth was, I knew nothing about it. It really isn't taught all that much in the American educational system. It's really not taught that much in the college system. And so I kind of got a little PO'd about all of that. And I wanted to know more about particularly Spiro because they were probably the most interesting and unique objects that I had seen in the collection. And it led to just a bigger conversation about the Mississippians and particularly Spiro. But then you can't really have a conversation about Spiro without having a conversation about the larger Mississippian world. So then it led me into wanting to know more about the Mississippians in general, and then also iconography, because one of the principal parts of Spiro is the vast material cultural items that were there. I mean, Spiro is the most object-laden mountain that I'm aware of ever discovered in North America. And the question in my mind is why? Because coupled with that, it's also the smallest mound site that I'm aware of, principal mound site that I'm aware of. So anyway, without further ado, we'll get started. So I hope you can see that my slide is not progressing. There we go. I just need to figure out how to do it. So for those who are not familiar, and I suspect most people who are all on this podcast are somewhat to this presentation are somewhat familiar with the Mississippi world, particularly Cahokia. For those of you who are not, I'm just going to kind of do a brief rundown, talk just a little bit about how we got here in the first place. But, when you look at Native North America, it's, and I think that what we really need to do, and this is why it's important to talk about it in this conversation in bigger circles, is American history goes back 20,000 years. I mean, even further, in my personal opinion. I'm a pre-Clovis guy. I'll be the first to throw it out there. And so I very cautiously put it at 20,000, but we'll see. But you're looking at, the peopling of America, and you're looking at first Paleo-Indian folks who were creating these beautiful fluted points and a variety of different types across North, Central, and South America. Gradually, that gave rise to the Archaic period, where you have beautiful assortment of stone projectile elements, which are also viewed on this PowerPoint. And then the Woodland period, these rough dates, they change a little bit depending on where. But the reason I highlight this is because you have this piece that I think is probably one of the finest examples of North American artwork ever. And I know that maybe they didn't view it in terms of art, but it still doesn't diminish its beauty and its place within the world. And one of the things that I want to do as well is whenever I do exhibitions here on Native American history, and that's where I do the bulk of my work. I might be the Cowboy Curator, but that's because Jackson Sundown is the logo for the museum, and he is a Native American cowboy who ended up fighting with Chief Joseph in 1877, and then won Pendleton as the all-around cowboy in 1915 at 53 years old. So Native Americans and cowboys have a very long and celebrated history. So, but you'll see it in the upper part of this slide is a beaver effigy pipe. Now that is a woodland period pipe, and I think it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It's not big, it's probably about 4 inches long, but you could see it's perfectly sculpted. The eyes are river pearls, and the teeth are real beaver teeth. And this is approximately 2,200 years old, and it's just quite phenomenal. This eventually gave rise to what we know as the Mississippian period, and on one of the lower slides, it shows a picture of a falcon holding a human head in his hands. And this is a beautiful piece as well. It's a pipe, but what's really intriguing about this is a colleague of mine actually had a question about potentially identifying the location associated with given objects. And so he knew that this was made out of limestone. So he partnered with a geologist named David Dockery, and they began to track down limestone sites. And they eventually found this particular seat of limestone just south of Vicksburg on the Mississippi River, and it connects to a whirlpool. So, knowing that some of these objects, how they're being actually used, but how they're being carved and sculpted is important, but so is the material. I think it's a very underappreciated aspect of Indigenous culture and Indigenous belief in this period is the material types are important. They're very important. Oh, it works. And then gradually, the historic period, which I have a nice slide of a teepee, so we're going to kind of bring all this together in the context of Spiro. So the main part of this is who are the Mississippians? So we briefly talked to you. It's probably the third, the fourth major period of cultural development here in the Americas. It's where I think you're at your height of what we call north of the Rio Grande, not necessarily North America, but north of the Rio Grande. You have the Mississippians, and so the great question is, who are they? Where and with whom did they trade, and did they travel? What was the environment? And more importantly, what was for this context of this lecture, what were their beliefs? And so you could see that I used some engravings here by Lemoy, and actually these are by White in the 1600s. And so this kind of gives us probably our best physical and visual representation of the Mississippians and who the indigenous people were in North America when European contact was made. So this is really the kind of the geographical framework in which we're talking about. And so you're looking at the principal Mississippian area here, which is basically covering the entire eastern half of the United States. And then you have the Caddoan-speaking people, of which the Spiroans we think are the primary. But this is all Mississippian. So whether green or orange, we're really talking about the Mississippian realm here. And so, excuse me real quick. Here you could just see kind of a brief image. So I think it's best to quickly just highlight. So excuse me real quick. Is that you could see that we're talking about principal mounds. Now there's all kinds of different mounds that occurred here, but the main mounds that we're really going to focus in on here is Cahokia, Etowah, Moundville, and Spiro. There were many others. Lake Jackson is the principal area. There are a multitude, probably an uncalculable at this point in time, number of at least smaller states and cities that would have occurred here, but we're going to primarily focus on the big ones here. So this being Cahokia, and so this is just an artist rendering of this, which is just kind of really highlighting, the aspects of larger Cahokia, how big it would have been, and the various characteristics of it. Here we're talking about Etowah. Etowah is a very unique place in that it was actually constituted and then it collapsed and then it's reconstituted again, which is really kind of fascinating, particularly when you look at some of the iconography and what's behind some of that reconstitution and when it occurs, because it's reconstituted after the collapse of Cahokia. This is one as well, Moundville here. Moundville, you could see still, just like in the historic period, we're talking about a heavily palisaded community and a large mound-driven society. What makes Moundville particularly interesting is that by 1400, Moundville has pretty much turned completely into an ossuary. And I think that that's important because it kind of plays into the larger Mississippian realm. And how all of these communities are really connected to each other. The last realm we're going to talk about, or the last community here, is Spiro. Spiro, again, is, you could see in the upper right-hand corner with those four little mounds there. That's the area which we're primarily going to be discussing today, because that is initially what we would call the Great Mortuary and then the Hollow Chamber. But Spiro, again, had no more than 12 platform mounds, and it had a population base right now, according to LIDAR and other things, that probably did not exceed 2,000 people. So, again, it was one of the smallest sites of all the Mississippian realms. So, I'm really embarrassed right now. No one texts me, and then all of a sudden, I just blew up, and I got like 10 text messages. So, my apologies. The Mississippian world. So we have the tri-layered universe. And this is what's important, is because when we talk about who the Mississippians were, we don't have a writing system. Like most cultures that we know of in the world, we're able to kind of go back, and they developed at some point in time a written language which is able to be augmented with the archaeological data. And you're able to compare both of those things and a host of other things in order to get a really holistic interpretation of a given society, especially ones that are thousands of years old, that you may not have known about, that have collapsed for one reason or another, or changed and morphed into something else. So we don't really have that. So what we have in the Mississippian period is iconographic representations. And so when you look at these iconographic representations, it's on copper, it's on shell, it's in stone, it's on wood. And so what it does is it almost acts as a pictographic narrative. It it helps us. We call it I refer to it kind of as a semi-seriographic writing system, because what you have is a system of belief that, let me go back here actually, that connects all of these different communities. So I like to put this in terms of Europe. And this just gives people a framework of kind of what I'm talking about. In Europe, we have primarily what we call the Abrahamic faith. They begin with Judaism, they move to Christianity and Islam, and all of those are connected to really the same religious underpinning. And then when you get into Europe, you have all of these different states, these different countries that are there, but connecting them all is largely these Abrahamic faiths, largely Christianity, and then you have Germany, France, England. And so each of those has their own language, but they also have their own architecture, but within it is churches. And you can go to a church in any one of those countries and you know you're in a church. And they largely have the same iconography associated with it. And so that kind of gives you a semblance of understanding of the united belief structure that kind of connects all of these different areas, regions, regardless of the language they speak or the country in which they're currently residing in. So back to the Mississippian world then. They believe in a tri-layered universe, and this is a universe that is actually connected to the above, middle, and below realms. The above realm is one that we call, it's a place of order and harmony. It has the sun, the thunders, morning star. And you could see a lot of these pieces are wrapped up in their iconography. From a belief perspective, they believe that the world sits on the back of a turtle shell in a primordial sea. And this is a very generic, because there's a bunch of different ways in which this came about, but they believe that sea started rocking ever so slightly, and so you have underwater serpents and other creatures, depending on the community, depending on the folklore, that would have gone down and actually come up on the four cardinal directions and balanced the world and stabilized it all. Now that world actually flips, and so you have daytime and night sky. And so there is the beneath and the underworld and the above world, and they're all actually connected. They're all part of a larger dualistic system that unites the entire Mississippian realm. And you could see a lot of these. For instance, you see the hand motif that's in the upper left-hand corner, and that in his hand is actually a portal which connects people to the Milky Way, and that's a place that is a place you go when you pass away. And so you could see a lot of this is connected, but you could see in the bottom corner that Milky Way actually kind of moves through Earth Mother as well in the night sky. And so later on, we'll come back to that and have a conversation about that as well. This, again, is a physical representation of the tri-layered world. Connecting them all was, what I didn't say here, was an axis mundi, a tree of life. An axis mundi, it's a term that we use almost worldwide. It's just a way of communicating that there is something that connects all of these realms together. And it's usually used by medicine leaders as well as deities that allows them to move between realms. Now, this is a physical manifestation in shell of the tri-layered universe. And so I'll kind of briefly go through this, but you could see, if you look at this, that there is that outer ring, then there's a ring just inside of it, then there's a double circle, and then a whirlpool design, and then the Pleiades in the night sky. And so one of the things that we do, particularly within iconography, is you have these pieces, you find them archaeologically, but you really have no context. Why? Because A, you don't have the folklore, or you don't have a written language explaining it. So you are really sitting here trying to understand, how does this come about? And so when I did my PhD, I did it with a combined emphasis on anthropology and history. And that's because I like to look at the pre-Columbian iconography, but I use oral traditions, ethnographic literature, and history in order to kind of use a more historical approach for understanding the pre-Columbian past. Because this history didn't just have a stop and a start. like ongoing American history goes back, like I said, when this began 20 to 25,000 years ago. And so it didn't just stop or start with European contact, which means the communities and what they believe pre-European contact continues after European contact. So you just need to take what that whole European concept there and just kind of toss it out the door. So, for example, how do we know this though? How are we kind of looking at some of these things? Well, one of the best ways you do this is through a concept called pars pro toto, which is essentially saying you can substitute one thing in a given iconographic item and apply it to another. The reason you need to do that is because they don't have the ability to, for instance, to draw the entire Birdman, who we know is associated with the upper world here. So we need to take an element of him and put it in here. And those that see this, back to that semi-seriographic writing system, are going to understand, hey, that's Birdman, because that's an element of Birdman. Think about a stop sign. Doesn't matter what language you speak anywhere in the world, you see it, you know it, and there we go. Next, we're looking at, well, what is this center section here? It's the real world. It's the world in that trilateral universe, the above, the middle, and the below. The middle represents our realm. And how do we do this? Well, this is a large gorget that was found at Spiro. And you could see, well, how do we interpret this? Well, one of the things that I think people never originally looked at is this is actually meant to be seen in 3D. And so if you'll take that circle that is behind those two men dancing, and that shaft that's in the middle, and lay it flat. And what you're looking at is a dance circle with the shaft in the middle, and note that their feet are in that circle. That's important because what it's representing is a dance circle. And you could see that that circular line in the middle, which I've drawn an arrow to, represents that dance circle, which is a representation of our world. This in the middle, what you have is a swirl pattern or a whirlpool. And as we know, the entrance to the underworld comes in two different forms, primarily, which is caves and whirlpools. And so this is a physical representation of that whirlpool. You can see that this, again, did not stop with the Mississippians. This is Little Bluff Shield. This is a Cheyenne shield from 1864. And note at the bottom of that shield, what are you looking at? You're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5, not 6, but you have 5 circles with one in the middle. And that's the thing about this gorget, is what is this thing? And what we've come to find out is, at least we speculate because it makes a lot of sense, is this is the Pleiades. And the Pleiades is important because when we first began, I told you that there was the hand, and the hand represents the Milky Way and the entrance that you go to in order to go to the next realm. But most communities here in North America believe in rebirth or regeneration. And so if you believe in rebirth and you have an exit, you also need a way to re-enter the world. And I believe the way that you re-enter the world is through the Pleiades. And so this particular gorget is connected to Earth Mother, but it's also connected to rebirth. And it's important as part of a way to reconstitute tribal communities, but also individuals so that they can be reborn back into this realm. And that has that entire psychology and the way that they believe that is very important to how we interpret Spiro as well. And so this is a really important piece. And you could see, again, it's connected to both the Mississippi and the historic realms. Another example of how you can look at objects here is that here are 3 different gorgets. One of the things that's really cool about this is that all 3 of these are made to be utilized together. They're not side by side, they're on top of each other. And so, again, anyone that's looking at this is going to actually know what all 3 of these scenes mean. And so it begins with that ritual vessel at the bottom. You could see that they have gourd rattles in their hands, and then the steam, the smoke, whatever that is moving up, and eventually winds around a representation of the sun or the above world. And so what you're looking at is probably the trilayered universe here, but in 3 different realms. So I think it's pretty cool. So again, you're looking at a real world representation. Now, when you looked at the Hopewell stuff, that stuff is way more, I think realism is much more important at that period. And here in the Mississippian realm, you seem to get more chimera creatures. You seem to get creatures that both are physically represented in the real world, but also change ever so slightly and have a more supernatural connection to themselves. They seem to not only be a falcon, which is the case in this instance, but it also has certain characteristics associated with it that makes it more of a deity or makes it more supernatural than less just a given entity. So when we get to the historic period, how do we know kind of what this stuff is? Well, there's been some folks who say, you know, how do we know? Can we trust some of these sources? And I think that what you can do is you have to actually look at some of these sources very critically. I don't think that you could just 100% dive into them and accept them at face value. But there are certain instances in which I think you can. And so these three particular pieces, were engravings done by Lemoyne. And I have seen other references to these in different parts of what we call today the United States, particularly in the Southwest and in the Plains. And these seem to match up quite well. So one, you're looking at grass houses in the piece on the left. The one in the middle is a palisaded community. And again, that's from 1567. It's done in Florida. And what's intriguing about that is there's actually a height painting in the mid 1600s that's done in the Southwest. It's actually still at a museum in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And they draw Wichita fortifications identical to this. The same palisaded way in which there's a single entrance point. It's all done in a circle with homes on the inside. It's completely identical. So I think that there is some accuracy to these, and I think that it's worth comparing these to both the folklore and to the archaeology to get a sense of what's mixing, matching, and being accurately displayed. Moreover, this is a pre-Columbian piece. This is a head pot. Now, notice this is the drawing from the Codex Canadiensis, which was done by Jesuit priests in Canada. And you could see that a lot of this is actually fairly accurate. We are seeing physical tattooing on people. Almost everyone here in the Americas is tattooed. Everyone. But everyone in the world is tattooed. So this whole non-tattooed thing is just a very recent endeavor. Christians were tattooed. Everyone's tattooed. And you could see that there's physical representations of maturity, of actually who your people are. For instance, in plain sign language, this is the Wichita people. And you could see sun tattoos here, but then you see instances of leg tattoos, arm tattoos, which represents people's society, the societies in which they're in within the community, and a multitude of other aspects. And this is everywhere. So this is just an amazing piece because this is what I believe is the first instance of the physical representation of coming together of two cultures. This is a Spanish style gorget, but it's done with Caddo engraving, and it is from 1650. Pretty cool. So the crux of where we're at here, Spiro, site, and ceremony. So this brings us to the larger question. We understand kind of the ritual belief system. We've had just a quick, brief overview of who the Mississippians were. We know that they stretched across the entire eastern half of North America, for the most part. And we know that they kind of begin their foundations at about 900, 1050, you know, with the foundations of Cahokia, some of these other larger ceremonial centers. And what we found is that how, you know, so we had a conversation about how the Spiroan people were connected to the larger Mississippian realm. But the question is how and why was Spiro so unique? Why do we keep bringing this stuff up? You know, I know, you know, Cahokia really is one that kind of gets a lot of news because of the the size of the site. It's outside of St. Louis. Spiro is in LaFleur County, Oklahoma. It's 10 miles west of Fort Smith, Arkansas. There's really no one there. Oklahoma has not done a good job at all of marketing this or just trying to kind of put this on a world platform, but it's part of my job. And what I want to do is to also get Spiro UNESCO World Heritage status. And so the question is, why Spiro? Why is Spiro this unique site in all of the Mississippian realm? And one reason is because it had something that none of them else had, which is what we've called a spirit lodge. And it's something that is completely different. And so the big question, you've heard me say it multiple times, I'm not going to stop saying it, but why Spiro? And when I first began looking at Spiro Mounds, I didn't know, and no one could tell me. James Brown did this amazing book. James, just a genius, because he really was one of the first people to understand Spiro and its uniqueness. Some other people did, but they were really connecting the Spiro iconography and the stuff to the Maya and to the cultures in South America and Central America, which really just wasn't fair to Native North America or the Mississippians. In that they had their own unique culture. And so Jim was really the first to start doing a really systematic art historical approach to isolating iconographically all the images that were being seen at Spiro. And so what we just came to really understand is that this was unique, but no one could really tell us why. And so I think the big aha moment came when we connected it to environmental change. And so what we really started seeing, and the data has supported this, it's a publication that I did about Spiro, is that you see, for the most part, the collapse of the Mississippian realm seems to be connected to an environmental upheaval, which begins a mini ice age in about 1350 that lasts until about 1650. And I don't mean that it's cold all the time. What I mean is that you have these dramatic changes in environmental structure, primarily long periods of drought. Now, when you have a large agricultural community, what's the number one thing that connects all of these agricultural entities? And that is crops. So the Mississippian people were pretty much connected to their agricultural base. And so when that collapses, you see the fundamental collapse of the society. So it was kind of this perfect storm when European contact happened, in that you saw the fundamental collapse due to environment of the larger Mississippian realms. And they broke off into these smaller groups. And it really kind of created a period of, upheaval, just dramatic change. But this all seems to be connected to the environment. And then back to our discussion. So you have all of this is connected to, and you could see Spiro was pretty much on the westernmost periphery of the Mississippian realm, which in and of itself makes this kind of interesting. Why not in the center? Why not Cahokia? Cahokia is the biggest mound out there. Why not Moundville, which is essentially an ossuary, or Etowah, or another community out there? But it's not. It's Spiro. And I think that there's a particular reason why it's Spiro. And what we started finding out was these engraved shell pieces, and we're talking potentially up to 800 engraved shell cups. This is an engraved shell cup, which is the top figure in what you're seeing. Once again, a depiction of Birdman. But then below, you have unengraved shell cups. You have the insides of them, which they're wearing as pendant. You're seeing beads and other things, ear spools, necklaces. And you see that when it comes to this, all of this shell actually came from the Florida Keys. And so distance traveled to reach Spiro is approximately 1,400 miles. You don't make that trip just willy-nilly. It's important. And so that kind of reinforces the importance of Spiro. And so the shells that you saw, the tiny little beads that would have been in necklaces, those are called dwarf olivella, and they come from the Gulf of California. And then you have the lightning whelk, which comes from the Gulf of Mexico, particularly the Florida Keys. Now, Big Boy, he's one of the most important figures that we see at Spiro, because he's also known as Red Horn. He's also known as Morning Star. You could see that in his ears, he wears these two pendants. Now, I believe these pendants represent the twins. And you can also see that he's got this necklace on, which you can see here's a necklace that we would have found at Spiro. And then you can't see it in this particular image, but that piece that he's wearing on the top of his head, that's a pallet. It's not a headdress, it's a pallet. And that represents a portal. That is not necessarily a diamond. I think that one thing that we have not done a great job of discussing and diving into and giving them the dust due is the importance of women in the Mississippian society, both iconographically and socially, because women are everywhere. And in fact, I believe the hollow chamber, what we're looking at, and I'll talk about it in a second, is a woman as well. So kaolinite and fire clay. Kaolinite, which we did find at Calumet at Spiro, comes from Minnesota. Flint clay, as we know, near Cahokia. Again, large distances traveled to reach Spiro. Copper. This is coming from the Great Lakes. We have, not me, but other academics have identified about 5,500 mines that go back a couple thousand years in that area. So you could see repeated use of mining to harvest copper. But I think a part of this too that really needs further investigation is how much of this is mined copper that we find at Spiro in the larger Mississippian realm, and how much is surface mined copper from glaciers and or the Appalachians. And what I would very much like to do, like that first pipe that we discussed, is have a conversation about whether the iconography matches the location. The iconography, specifically its relationship to the above, middle, and below realm, and if that's connected to geography. So if you're having to harvest from a particular location, and then that medium is associated with what is inscribed upon the piece. And you could see here's a hand. And this is another really cool piece, which we'll talk about, I think, here in just a second. But you have the copper, and you could see it's coming from various locations. Again, this is all coming to Spiro. So why Spiro? Now, I said, why is Spiro important? And I'll get to that in a second. Why not Cahokia? Why not Etowah? Why not Etowah? Why not Moundville? Why Spiro? And I think it's because it's all connected to sacred geography. I think that the reason you find so many pieces at Spiro is because there was a ritual that was performed at Spiro in approximately 1400. And more than that, I think it had to be performed at Spiro because Spiro was the physical representation of our realm. I think that when you're looking at how these different states and cities evolved, I think that they played a role in sacred geography. And to that, Jim Brown and originally came up with two primary iconographic styles, and that was Braden and Craig. And he divided these into Braden, Craig, but then A, B, and C, and Craig, A, B, and C. What I actually think we're looking at, and I think what we need to do is to systematically relook at all of these pieces, because I think you're looking at three iconographic styles. And I think those three iconographic styles are connected to both sacred geography and physical space. So I think Braden is primarily connected to Cahokia. I think Craig is connected to Spiro and the Caddoan realm. And I think the third style, Holly Bluff, is connected to Moundville or the underworld. Why is that important? It's because Moundville collapses at 1400 and it becomes an ossuary. It becomes a gateway to the underworld. And I think the reason why people brought their holiest items to Spiro is because Spiro, again, is our realm. It's connected to our living entity. And so when they needed to have a ritual site, it was done here. Now, what makes that kind of interesting is when we talk about Spiro Mounds itself, you'll remember that I talked about there was those four little waving mounds that were off in the distance of that image. Well, the rightmost three of these are what we call the Great Mortuary. The Great Mortuary is interesting because for approximately 400 years, the ritual elite were interred there. but it wasn't so simple. The ritual elite were interred with shell and other things from across the Mississippian realm. So a lot of the pieces that you see interred in that great mortuary were Braden and also from Cahokia. And so some of this stuff is actually being traversed down to Spiro for 400 years before it actually finds its way into what will eventually be the hollow chamber. What makes the hollow chamber so unique? Well, I think the reason why they needed to do it in the Great Mortuary is because they needed that power of the underworld. And one thing I didn't include in this lecture is that when you will oftentimes look at these ceramic vessels from the Mississippian period, there is motifs on the side of them. A lot of these motifs are underworld in scope. And then you have like a spouted vest, neck that comes out of it. Well, above that is oftentimes a little OG motif, representing a woman, but then you'll have a circle. And what that's essentially doing is creating a ritual vessel so that when you put stuff inside of this, it's going into the underworld. It's being mixed with underworld magic. And underworld's not bad, it's good. It's being mixed up as medicine, and then it's being poured back through the axis mundi. That spout on that ceramic is your axis mundi. It's being poured back through that spout and into our realm. And so I kind of just, in modern parlance, I'm going to say, think about it like a casserole dish. Any one of those ingredients doesn't work on its own. It's only when they're put together and slid into the oven that they're cooked and they're properly created, and then they're served or consumed in a ritualistic manner. And so when it came to the Great Mortuary, I think that that's what they needed to do. So what we found is they actually disinterred everyone in that fourth area right there, and they reinterred them in another location. So there aren't human remains in the hollow chamber. And then what they did, because they wanted that underworld, so they went and they made this ritual chamber inside of what was formerly the Great Mortuary. And it was kind of interesting because we never could really figure this out. And then, hand it to Jim, we ended up in 1932, an ornithologist printed some of his work from the late 1800s, where he had been invited into an Arikara community, and he had recorded what he saw, and he never thought to publish it or do anything with it until the 30s, and which he did. And we found that the inside of the hollow chamber at Spiro seems to match up very closely to Pawnee and Arikara earth lodges. And so you see a very similar layout, and you see a very similar action. Just as much of that is what that hollow chamber actually represented. So, but we start thinking, okay, well, why this hollow chamber and all of the stuff? And when we say all the stuff, remember, we had stuff from across the known world. We had copper, we had shells. Some of this had been brought in earlier, but the bulk of it is being brought in at 1400 specifically for this ritual. Also, on some of the pieces Jim has identified as Craig C, I don't think you're looking at Craig C. I think you're looking at objects that were needed to ritualistically be acted upon, and those things were inscribed. Now, the reason they're chippy and they're a little bit rough is because it's extremely difficult to carve into shell, and so because of that, I think that they needed to apply an acid or a lime. And that's what I think is happening here. I think that they're painting these motifs on shell, and they're letting it kind of soak into the shell. And it's done repeatedly, time and time again, until it weakens it enough that you can start carving these shells out and create the image you want to. The problem with that is, if you need a shell that needs to be physically used in a ritual, it needs to be done fast. And that's why I think some of the stuff that we identified as Craig C is actually just Craig, but it was used specifically for the Spiroan ritual. And again, that's why it's chippy. Also, the Oklahoma Archaeological Survey, in partnership with the Caddo and the Wichita, have been doing ongoing archaeological excavations at the site and LIDAR. And what they identified was these temporary housing structures you see here. This is Patrick Livingood, Scott Hammerstedt, Amanda Rainier. They've been doing amazing work. They're amazing archaeologists. They have done some great papers, which you should look up. They've been doing some great research on Spiro. And any students out there looking for a place to study, I'm going to recommend OU, and particularly them. They're terrific. And but they identified these temporary housing structures potentially littering the entire surrounding area of this, what would have been hollow chamber, which means you needed a place for everyone to come to and live while they brought their holy items, and then it turned into the hollow chamber. Now, how was it interred? What you have here in the exact middle of this this hollow chamber is Earth Mother, and she plays the most single important role here. You see, Big Boy is in actually the top of this drawing up on the upper right. And then you see probably First Man, and that would have been a giant wooden sculpture. And then you see all of these, what we call God boxes. The reason we identify these as God boxes is because we think that they have ritual outfits in them. And each of these boxes had a different design on them. And you could see at the bottom, these are at the Harvard Peabody Museum. And what they have is each is different kind of designs on the outside. But these designs match the Spiro designs from 700 years earlier. These are double woven Chittimaka baskets created by Clara Darden in 1900. And so this is important because, again, cultural continuity, cultural continuance, common iconography, it's still being utilized. Why is Earth Mother in this case very important? It's because she's responsible for rebirth. So she plays the single most important role here, because what are you trying to do in an environment with environmental upheaval? You're trying to restart time. You are trying to restart the universe. And how do you do that? You ritualistically reenact the story of creation. And that's what's happening here at Spiro. That's why Spiro was so important, is because all of the Mississippians knew we're all in this together. We have this environmental upheaval. You can see this occur in the historic period too. Think about the ghost dance. It's created by Wovoka. It's created in the western half of the United States. It spreads like wildfire to the north and to the south. What is that? It's a ritual with a 7-day dance. It has song, it has incantation, and it's going to have a ritual outcome, which is essentially to restart time as well. It is to get rid of the Europeans and bring back animals in the hunting grounds, to restart the world. And that's what happened here at Spiro. We see this time and time and time again. What you're seeing at Spiro is nothing new from what we saw in the historic period. And so this is what's inside of this, but it's done on a giant scale. And that's why you have dozens and dozens of these mesas. That's why you have probably 800 cups, 100 minimum are fully engraved. And when Alex Barker and George Sabo began to actually look at these, and they did an article on this as well, is when you lay these out side by side, they become like chapters in a book. They become narrative based. Once again, you're looking at a pictographic writing system. And that's what makes Spiro unique. This is another example of it, because this is all tied together. This is not only just a map of the universe, it's also a map highlighting kind of the story of creation. This is found at Spiro. Well, you see all that stuff on the right, all of those different motifs and images and those lines and the crazy. I think what you're looking at is the chaos before creation. And that's why it's important that it's on the backside of what would have been a large whelk shell. I mean, 2 feet. Because the shell engraving, the shell would have been taken from the upper portion of it. And then what do you see coming through this? Well, note in the middle there, that's a whirlpool, entrance to the underworld, and then a dance circle. But Spider is coming out of that. She's coming out of that chaos. into creation. And note that her legs are now on top of that dance circle. Yeah. And then you have the hands, which is the Milky Way. And then above that are the tufts of Birdman. So this is not only a map of the universe, I think it's a story of creation. Just like those Abrahamic faiths I told you about, everyone knows how the world was made. And they did too. And they ritualistically reenacted it. And that's what's in those God boxes. Each of those God boxes held a different deity. And that deity came out and was part of that story. And he played a ritualistic role in that. So archaeology and looting. This is one of the saddest parts, and it's horrible because this becomes one of the largest examples of looting in United States history. And this was undertaken in the 1930s. 1933, a group calling themselves the Coal Mining Company actually found the Spiro site, and they leased it from the family, and they began to loot it. And they did that for 2 years. Now, because they were trying to enter in various locations, they weren't really getting anywhere until 1935 when they started seeing certain things. Actually, the University of Oklahoma and Forrest Clements began to notice things popping up on the antiquities market, and they began to realize that it has to be potentially from this site. They go find it, and they shut it down, and they passed some of the first antiquity laws in the United States. Unfortunately, these looters didn't care for it, and they went in, they blew a hole in the side of the mountain, and they went in and just systematically looted it all. And it was horrible because lining the hollow chamber would have been giant textiles. And these textiles you could see at NMAI and NMNH at the University of Oklahoma Sam Noble Museum. There's lace from the Southwest. The colors are blue and green and yellow and black. I can't even imagine how different our perception would have been of Native North America had this not occurred. I mean, it's just truly a loss, and it's tragic. There's just no way around it. For a number of reasons. And you can see here's the paper from December 15th, 1935. They called it America's King Tut's Tomb in the Arkansas Valley. And what I didn't say earlier, and I should have, was when this ritual was completed at Spiro in approximately 1400, they ritualistically acted out the story of creation, and then they closed the doors on the hollow chamber, and they walked away. And nothing was done with this site for the next 400 years until it was found by these looters. And so that's what makes it so unique, is because when they got done with that, they shut the door and they walked away. They didn't close off any of the power. They didn't do anything. And you could see these are some of the pieces. Big Boy, this is Kansas City Star. You can see Big Boy there. But then the WPA got involved, and they began to excavate there from 1936 to 1941. They began to bring stuff back to the University of Oklahoma. They reconstructed a lot of the ceramics and other pieces. I could give you a whole talk just on the reconstruction of some of these pieces, because what they did was that piece I showed you earlier, this one, this was found in pieces. And half of this piece was actually sent to the Oklahoma Historical Society, and the other half was kept at Sam Noble. But what they did was they took one real part and one fake part, and they put them together. And then they made two identical gorgets. And they also did that at Willow Rock, because the four primary groups that helped support the archaeology on this from 36 to 41 was OU, Oklahoma Historical Society, University of Tulsa, and the Frank Phillips Foundation, or Willow Rock. And so they all got pieces. Here's Phil. They also created a WPA mural. This is one of two. This would have been, 7 foot tall by 12 feet long. It's been a long time since I measured it. I'll just say it's big. And then these are images from the University of Oklahoma. Scott Hammerstead, Patrick Livingood, Amanda Rainier, all heading this up through the university and Oklahoma Archaeological Survey. And again, they partner with the Caddo and the Wichita on these excavations and have been doing them every year. But this was also an important part of Spiro is when I did the exhibition and when I did the publication, it was all about connecting the Spiroan people to contemporary communities. And so this is a language map of the United States. And you could see all the different communities here and how they're all connected. And what you don't see is that this is also a map of migration and how people would move through time. For instance, the Kiowa speak a Tiwa Puebloan language. They lived in Montana, until the horse arrived. The same with the Comanche. The Comanche lives in Montana, then they move out into the plains. The Kiowa, eventually, they're the ones who occupy the Black Hills. And then those Black Hills were taken in about 1800, 1810 when the Lakota moved onto the plains. And so you have all of these different communities that are constantly moving. The people that are, I think, largely called Navajo, but they're Dene. They come from the Canadian subarctic. And I think that migration pattern started at about 1100 with a volcano. But you see these, regardless of people moving and interconnectedness. And why can they move? Because they have this shared belief system, these shared values and iconography. But this is a Hopewell pipe. This is roughly 2,000 years old. Notice the headdress on the gentleman from the historic period. Pretty cool. Or this is one of the Spiro cups. This cup originates at Cahokia. I believe in the background, what you're looking at is the Pleiades right here, but note that in his left hand is an eagle feather dance fan. Same dance fan that is being used today. Also, historic imagery from people that are both painted and tattooed. Notice the markings on both of their shoulders and arms and the hand motif that's in his stomach. This is not changing. This is Woody Crumbo's headdress. It's his otter turban, I should say. Again, this is a picture of someone wearing a turban from Picture Cave. And again, another iconographic representation from Cahokia, which was found in Spiro. And then again, headdress, in all likelihood, eagle feather. Can't say for sure, but pretty confident. And this are two depictions of contemporary Native American artists, part of the Kiowa Six and flat style artwork. Again, Kiowa Sticks, Birdman. You're looking at some of these same motifs that are in the Southwest, Northern Plains, Southern Plains. They're everywhere. This is stuff that's constantly ongoing. Again, there's your Caddo grass or your Wichita grass house, and there's a depiction from Illinois. Not identical, but pretty close. And then again, cultural continuation, stuff that's ongoing. So you're looking at this beautiful, which is one of my favorite, on the right, one of the ceramic vessels that's part of the Gilcrease collection. But then Chase Earl's piece, which is a horse tripod vessel, that's in my collection at the Cowboy. And it is so lightweight. That piece is actually about 3.5 feet tall, and you could pick it up with one finger. That's how light it is. Again, same motifs, same stuff being used. This is a painting by Star Hardridge, who's from Skokie. It depicts twins, his twin, but twins. And then earlier, as you'll note, designs. There's that portal. There's those female imagery. There is diamond shapes. And I believe the diamond is also probably referenced to turtle and snapping turtle in particular. And the turtle that sits on the primordial sea, I believe it's a snapping turtle. And there's reasons for that as well. Again, if you look at here's a Kiowa peyote gourd, and look what's in the hand. That's Spiro courgette from 500 years ago. There's a piece of that fabric I was telling you about that was found at Spiro, and this would have been all over the place. This is probably a depiction of Birdman, but you could see how beautiful the textiles are. And then spider in the middle, Karen Berry. And then here's your hand motifs again. Once again, we're looking at something that is hundreds, if not thousands of years old, and it's about this cultural continuation. So with that, I think I went over, so I'm sorry about that. And I hope I can answer any questions.
We had 55 and it went down to 50. Well, 40, 49 just now. But since we did start 6 minutes late, you actually did your whole hour. Maybe some people did. Okay, I see one question. If you have any questions for Eric, please put them in the Slido and then I can I'll read them out to you. Jim D asks, is resting warrior with the symbol on the hat not the sacred vulva? I assumed it was. Diamond seems out of place.
Yeah, that's right. It's female.
So
the reason it's female is because the Spiro, just like you'd have in the like an earth lodge, or whether it was done with like sweat lodges, is it represents a woman's womb. And then you are in the woman's womb, you exit through the birth canal, and you were essentially reborn. Hence why you would go and bathe afterwards. And so that's why it's an important physical characteristic, particularly on a portal. It's because it's a physical representation of that ability for rebirth and to travel between these realms. So yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Did they put that on the figurine to represent all three worlds then?
In some cases, I think they did. In this particular case, I think for Big Boy, I think that they did it so that it just shows that his palette and his ability to be part of Earth Mother. Because I think that his ability to go into the night sky and go to both realms, particularly as he's with her.
Rosemary says, fascinating info. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for everyone for bearing with me. I guess I had in my head that we'd be talking till like 2:30, so I'm kind of sorry about that. Well, there's a lot to talk about. So
the WebEx is open till 2:30, but I know that people probably plan to be done by 2. But y'all are welcome to leave if you need to, obviously. Oh, I got a big one. Okay. Christina says, your discussion of the need to, quote, restart time made me think of the Maya calendar, which revolves around celebrating new cycles. Very curious what your thoughts are about the theory of Mesoamerican, specifically Mayan influence on Mississippian culture, as in the book Gods of Thunder. Yeah, what are your thoughts? Have you read that book?
Mm-hmm.
It's by Pocketat. I have not read it either.
Oh, wait, is that his recent book?
Yeah.
The one that was done through... Yeah, I read it, and I did a book review on it. So I'm sorry, I just didn't think... I didn't think about that title. Yeah, I think there's some elements of it that I don't necessarily, I think that there is... I think that you're looking at acquisition routes, and I think that you're looking at larger, overarching ritual iconographic elements that are kind of deep time, and they go way back. But I do think that, when you have, let's say, corn that's coming up here, it's being introduced into the Americas. I think following that corn, you actually have probably a cult that's coming with it. And so as that's developing in one particular region and it's connected to, an agricultural based community, I think that you're going to get connections that go with that. And I think that it's going to lead to cult status around a given thing. Again, I don't think that this is something that's entirely new. I think that when you have cultures that influence other cultures, what they're doing is they're adapting. They're adapting elements of that new culture, or particularly that new religion, into their own. And so then I think she plays a bigger role. But I mean, Earth Mother clearly played a role in North America prior to the entrance of corn. I just think she played a very specific role when it came to the corn cult. And so some of the stuff, like, you have, I think there is, I think you, I wish we could do more, but I wish there was more iconography in South America, which would offer us, I think, a better understanding of of ritual and belief in the Americas. Because I think if there was a better understanding of South American iconography, you could see how it compared to Central and, well, I'm just going to say North, Central, and South. Just seems to be easier, even though we only have two continents. I'm saying North, Central, South. But if you could understand the South better, I think it's going to give you more insights into Central and the North. But I think that the Mississippians, I think you should be looked at uniquely in their own way. But I do think that there's clearly connections there. I think that there's some linguistic connections there. There's clearly cult connections there. But then you also see cult connections between, I believe, Datura that potentially go into the Southwest. But I think some of this too is, I think instead of looking at this as trade routes, you look at some of these as acquisition routes.
Okay, this is, for some reason, my slide was jumping everywhere. Getty asks, do you have any recommendations on books to read or sites to visit to explore more about this thesis?
Well, I read the Spiro book, I did, and I'm not saying that just because it's mine, but because I think it's probably the newest and the most comprehensive book that you can do that both is iconographic. But I would also read Ancient Objects, Sacred Realms is a great one. And that was done by Kent Riley. And then there was another one called, yeah, that's it. And then there's another one, and don't get it on Amazon. The cheapest way is just to go to my museum store, because Amazon just jacks up prices. So I think you can get it for like $40 at my place. And we did it as a grant, so it was much cheaper. I insisted. In fact, I told them they couldn't sell it for more than that. And then Visualizing the Sacred is another book, which is a good one. Yeah, that Angela has right there. And I think that does a good job of kind of looking at this from an iconographic perspective. But again, I think what you need to do is look at this from three periods. You have to analyze the archaeology, the ethnographic literature, the oral traditions, and then put them all in context with each other, because again, you're not stopping history. So that makes sense. Good ways to start.
I'm gonna do two more questions because it's getting it's like almost 2:15. William says, I am in total support and agreement with your work as a curator. How do you respond to critics who opine that images of great goods should not be shown?
Well, they've already been shown. I'm not showing anything that hasn't been published in 10 different books. It's already online. I can do a simple Google search and find. But then the other part of that is when we did the exhibition, we worked with 15 different nations to incorporate their artwork into the exhibition. We worked with the artists from those nations. We got letters of support from the Caddo and the Wichita. I met with the not only the TIPO officers from both of those nations, but the executive committees. President Parton from the Wichita tribe came, Chairman Francis from the Caddo Nation as well, and she actually did a Zoom talk with us, which you can find online. And she talked about how we did this in partnership with the Caddo. Inviting in the elders, we found that they were in complete support of this. So, I think some of it is kind of, it's very difficult because you can't really, I think, you can't be everything to everyone in any given context. I can't support every single tribal member's belief, as I can't support every American's belief, or their perspective. So I think you just kind of take it a piece at a time. You try to talk to everybody as much as you can and get support for some of this. But again, the other part of this is if we don't talk about this, it's going to die. I mean, the government's done all they can to hide it and make it disappear. When you go to college, tell me one college that teaches in the history department or some others, minus a few archaeology courses, they teach Inca, Aztec, and Maya. We're the Mississippians.
I went to school here, so I learned about the Mississippians.
I know, but you're one of the rare. I mean, the vast majority, they're not talking about it. They talk about Inca, Aztec, Maya. You know, they should do a better job in our school system about talking about American history going back thousands of years, talking about the Mississippians, who were the people that were here when Europeans came. And I think emphasizing that Monk's Mound is this incredible feat of engineering. So you have all these mounds in Central America that were made of stone. Well, this wasn't made of stone. It's what? How old are we talking?
But
Let me say 800 years old, and this mound is still standing and looks phenomenal.
Okay, yeah.
That's a feat of engineering, and it's done with dirt.
Yeah.
That's engineering. I mean, try to build a neighborhood, and you see all this washout within a week. Like they understood stuff we don't even understand today. That's amazing, and that's what we should be teaching. And so I'm always so cautious that, you know, by removing the stuff from, you know, people's ability to learn from it, that you're going to set a precedent where all of a sudden no one knows about it, and if no one knows about it, no one cares about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think it's a dangerous path to go on. And I don't know the right answer, but I think it should be celebrated as America's history. And it's a beautiful, extraordinary, wonderful piece of American history.
Yeah. I think the hard part about that is how archaeology was developed in the US and how the vanishing Indian myth was so prevalent. And so it was like ignoring what the descendants were already doing or saying or needing to be done. And their voice was totally ignored when these excavations were going on. So that like power dynamic was very unbalanced. And so some could say it's going back, you know, another way. So it's hard. It's a hard thing to deal with. But for me, I think just talking with the dissent groups and like you said, how you got letters of support and saying like, you know, this is important for people to learn about. And, you know, how do y'all feel about it? I think having those conversations first and foremost is really important. For furthering that education.
Yeah. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head because someone says, well, how do you know this? And I said, I use this amazing technique. I ask.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really amazing. So like when I talked about the Pleiades, unbeknownst to me, you know, I was with the couple Seminole elders and we were talking about that particular gorget. And they immediately told me they knew exactly what it was. And they said, of course, it's a portal between the night sky. And they said that's how Bigfoot actually moves between our realm and the other side. And that's why no one can find it. That's because he goes through the Pleiades.
Yeah. Dr. Heather Ottone at the First Americans Museum, that's where I learned about the eye and hand being the Pleiades too. Like, or Orion.
Orion.
Yeah, she told me that and I was like.
So if you have your entrance, you need your exit.
Yeah. Okay, we have one question about the Pleiades. So Alexander says, you mentioned the Pleiades as an entrance into the world, parentheses, rebirth/reincarnation. Is it the same with death?
Well, not the Pleiades. I think it's your way back. So I think that when you die, you enter into the, that's where really your hand is, you know, that's the Orion. I think you enter through Orion, through the Milky Way, you go into that other realm. And then I think that particular gorget or that particular show cup with that gentleman in front of the Pleiades, he's the Lord of the Pleiades. He's who you appeal to get back into our realm. And so then I think it's the Pleiades that lets you back into this door, you know, into our realm. So you have an entrance door, you got an exit door. And I think that's what the Pleiades is. And the Pleiades is all over the world. If you want an example, the Nebra sky disk in Europe is done identical to the Pleiades motif that's seen here. And that's 1600 BC. So the Pleiades, whether it's the seven children, the seven sisters, it's wrapped up in, I think, deep time. I think a lot of this stuff is people are not having conversations about folklore, belief, ritual, and its connections to deep time humanity and probably some of the first beliefs that humans had. And that's probably, you got to ask yourself, why is there a story of the twins all over the world, in every single continent, everywhere? Romulus and Remus. I mean, because what it does is the twins represent, and we call them wild boy and civilized boy, but the twins represent this change between adolescence and maturity. So you could look at them both as iconographic, religious, and psychological. So these societies do this because it's the wild is killed, the civilized goes on, and so it's these twins are important because it's your two sides of who you are, whether you're male or female. Immaturity and maturity.
See. And then where did it go? Christina says recommendation for learning about South American iconography. Go to the Museo Larco in Lima, Peru, and many other museums in Lima. I think there are clear parallels with the Eagle, Jaguar, Snake trilogy that represents 3 levels of the world in most Indian art.
Yeah, no, I think iconographically they're there. I just haven't seen a lot that's kind of definitively kind of done the steps to match that culturally, to look at how those depictions are being used and what's the context in which they're used and stuff. I think they're there, and I've actually picked up a few more books on it too. I just wish there was more. I think people need to do more on it.
Maybe
but still, that's a great recommendation because that's a wonderful museum. And there's an archive at Harvard too.
Gary, this was earlier. He said attended the Spiro exhibit at the Cowboy Museum. It was awesome.
Thanks, Gary. It was, and it just got progressively better every day. Our attendance went up every single day, and that was during COVID. By the end, it was waiting room only. That's why I keep telling you, people want to know more about this stuff. We had people flying in from everywhere. In fact, I had Zooms. We had a Zoom. Our average Zoom attendance was 40 states and 5 countries.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just a few more comments that I think you would appreciate. I'm so thankful to have grown up next to Cahokia. Feels like a missing piece of the history of North America that almost nobody else is exposed to. Thank you so much for the talk. Planning a spring trip to Cahokia, Poverty Point, and now I have to add Spiro. Thank you.
It's not the sexiest site, but it's being redone.
Thank you so much for this. This was fascinating. And then final thing, and then we'll end because it's almost 2:30. Thank you all who have hung on. Christina said also part 2 of my comment about Indian art iconography. Jeez Louise. The Coricancha Museum in Cusco has a good exhibit about the role of the Milky Way in Inca iconography. So
awesome.
Since we're close to 2:30, thank you so much for your presentation. Well, thank you so much. I hope
thanks everyone for spending your Sunday listening to a dude talk about iconography. Thanks for having me and putting up with me for an hour. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you. And we got a couple more thank yous from people. So thank you so much, Eric.